Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast, where we look at horses and riding from the inside out. I'm Kirsten Nelson, professional horse trainer, and with me is my good friend, Debbie Romero, certified Alexander technique instructor. And so today's topic, I think this is the title, is what's on the agenda? And what does that mean? So,
What does that mean? Whose agenda?
whose agenda? What
Who's
agenda?
got an agenda?
Who's got an agenda, right? Because as soon as you have one, the horse is going to change it.
Yeah, that's
So
like
I,
that's like a friend of mine was we were making plans about going somewhere on a certain day at a certain time and she looked up and she said, "I'm not making plans." It's just on pencil. It's not a
it's,
plan.
it's just penciled in.
It's just penciled in.
Yeah. No, but I think the topic of agendas is a good one because it's really the human agenda of competing or regaining, like selling a young horse or selling the horse they have or competing with a certain horse or getting to a certain level in a certain time frame. Like that's the human agenda. I want to make my money back on breeding. I want to get these horses sold because I need income. I want this horse to get through training because TikTok, I need to get back in the show ring. I need to get in the show ring. I need to get to the next level of showing. All of those to me are the human agenda that creates a lot of problems.
I agree.
Yeah, because the horse's agenda doesn't always match that. So, what's the horse's agenda? I got to eat. I got to poop. I got to see my friends.
And you want to do what, human? You
Yeah,
really?
yeah.
We're so lucky some of them might try to kill us, but most of them put up with us. It's
Not
amazing.
only put up with us, but I think most horses, if they're not scared and they're not being leveraged into like massive discomfort in order to be ridden, they love working with humans. They're very
Hmm.
generous. They don't try to kill us most of the time. They really cooperate. And I think it's interesting if you live life in a barn or a pasture or a paddock with a few other horses, it's kind of interesting to go do some work with your human. And so the horse's agenda is basically, I got to feel safe and I got to feel comfortable. And that can
Right.
include the barn, the care, the turnout, the food, all of that, but safe and comfortable. That's kind of their agenda. And the human agenda is much more complicated.
It
And
can
we
be.
have a much sort of, I think horses have a great sense of time. Like they can nail a 1 hour
Hmm.
session down to the minute.
Yeah, I just had a horse do that today. Well, I was long lining him and he just went to the gate at like 55 minutes. I'm like, oh my God,
Yeah, or they just
really?
take you right by the mounting block, or you
Yeah.
could get off now. Or feeding times, horses can
Hmm.
get pretty neurotic about feeding times. So they do have a sense of time, but not a goal-oriented sense of time pressure,
That
which
something
is
has to happen in a certain amount of time.
other than feeding.
Yeah. I mean, we as humans really get stuck in that.
But even the feeding time neurosis, it's like that's partially our creation.
I totally agree.
And when we feed at the exact same time every day or multiple feedings at the exact same time, then we cause the horse to get worried if the food's not on time. So I try to kind of allow an hour window around feeding time. So it's not exactly precise, sometimes a little early, sometimes a little late.
Right.
And that does reduce the neurosis around feeding times. But what we're really talking about is agendas. And for the human agenda, the time factor becomes getting to the goal sooner than later. And part of this came up in a conversation because we just recently got the news that an Olympic level rider who is a fantastic rider. I like Charlotte Dujardin. I like how I won when she won the London Olympics. I thought she did a beautiful freestyle test. And she's been a bit of a darling in dressage competition in the dressage world. And a video came out of her quote unquote teaching her horse, the Piaffe, by just basically really abusing the use of the whip on the
Yeah,
horse.
I saw the video. It was
I did
a
not see it. I don't.
horse rider combination, and she was on the ground with the whip.
And it's not an, it's the conversation I had with some of my clients was what's most interesting to me and why I wanted to talk about it. Because it's so common in the horse world to use leverage and very, very harsh tactics that we look at it as a given, that it is okay unless it exceeds a certain point. But I go, where is that point?
Yeah, who's
And
making that
people,
judgment call?
who's making that judgment call? Not the
Yeah.
horse. And also, it's justified in a way by saying, I need to get this horse sold before the horse loses value. I need to get to the next level of competition so that I can positively influence more people. It's weird justifications like that that make very, very good people, maybe even inadvertently, do abusive things to horses.
Or even just the lack of knowledge of, what things should actually happen in a training session.
Well, the lack of knowledge is always where abuse starts. And we've
Yes.
we've talked about that, like even the last couple podcasts ago, recognizing stress responses and how we respond
Mhm.
to our horse's stress response. And when we react to our horse's stress response by becoming stressed and acting out instinctively, that's where a lot of very harsh tactics take a hold. And that's
Right.
where we lose our temper, we get carried away. Everybody sort of whips their horse too hard or pulls their horse around or uses this extra leverage or goes and buys spurs. So all of those things are sort of so commonly seen that there's almost an unconscious acceptance that that's the way
It's
things
a
need
good
to
way to
be.
put it.
And it's funny, like when I had this conversation, I got so angry because I was like, many, many years ago, the term rule of thumb, do you know where that comes from?
No, I have no idea.
The rule of thumb meant that because so many men beat their wives and children, that the law was you couldn't beat them with anything thicker than your thumb. And that was the rule of
Wow.
thumb. And so it was just accepted that women were beaten or children were beaten. It just like we sort of go, well, horses need harsh corrections. And I go, there's a massive difference between being firm, even to the point of like it's uncomfortable. Like I am not opposed to making a sharp correction on a panicking horse,
Yeah, I mean,
right?
it comes to our safety and boundaries.
Exactly. Or for the sake of
That's important,
everybody's safety in the moment, if I
right?
have to use leverage or use a harsh correction, it's sort of like, grabbing your panicking friend and kind of shaking them and going,
Shaken
stop
baby syndrome.
panicking. Not shaking babies, but it's like when if you have to sort of interrupt a panic response, I
It's
can
interrupting
see.
a habitual unconscious pattern.
It's not, yeah, it's just an instinct. So I go, when
Yeah.
somebody goes into that level of fear, sometimes the interruption to that panic mode can look harsh. And I'm not judging that, but as a training tool to
Mm.
educate a horse, I go, I'm very opposed to harsh treatment because you're not going to educate.
Well, and I just watched a short video this morning from a neurologist, neuroscientist about when something like that happens, even as humans, we go into the emotional side of the brain, which is subconscious. So that shuts down the logical side.
Yes.
You you can't you're in a different mode, and it's very hard to switch. out of that back into the conscious state.
Yeah, you literally, if the body is unstable at a certain threshold of discomfort that becomes pain, which is unique to every individual. There's a
Right.
different threshold for every living creature between discomfort and pain. Or if there's a degree of fear that the sympathetic nervous system is taking over, I go, the frontal cortex part of the brain, what we call conscious awareness, it literally can't fire. It's all
Right.
limbic system and instincts. And so everything becomes unconscious and it's based on instincts and survival. And so imagine if we're treated harshly, like if we're in an abusive situation and somebody's beating on us regularly, first of all, you're not going to get the best performance out of the one being beaten.
Right.
It's going to
It's
compromise
not going to be
all
optimal.
performance. Yeah. And secondly, just like I think horses respond the exact same way people do. And I want to back that up a little bit because in Candace Pert's research, and she wrote the book, The Molecules of Emotion, she did lots of lectures. One was called The Body is the Subconscious Mind. And she was a research scientist who was with the National Institute of Health for many years. One of the primary researchers, I think back in the 70s,
Mm-hmm.
on trying to map out opiate receptors, what
Yes.
makes
Mm-hmm.
drugs work in the body. And she explains in pretty easy layman terms how the emotional life of all living creatures really is it's a biochemical process,
Mm-hmm.
right? So your glands and even organs are producing ligands, neuropeptides, well, what we called neuropeptides, which meant proteins produced by the brain, we find neuropeptides in the gut, in the heart, in the
Right. We
liver.
now know that they're everywhere.
They're everywhere.
They're not in one place.
Right. They're still called neuropeptides, but
Right.
basically peptides and ligands carry this biochemistry that we experience as emotion, which locks into receptors on the cell's surface throughout the entire body.
Right.
And that's why emotions don't involve thinking a lot.
No,
It's a visceral, which
it's totally of the unconscious.
it's unconscious to what we call conscious awareness, but it's
Right.
a body consciousness. And it's
Right.
what's technically called a visceral reaction. And visceral just means outside of the brain. So it's an intelligence that the body has that we experience as emotions. And one of the things Candace Pert mentioned that just bowled me over when I was listening to one of her lectures was that um, they've proven, and I think the theory of evolution suspected, and they have now proven that this biochemical process of peptides and ligands going into cell surfaces is the most highly conserved part of evolution
Mm,
throughout all species.
interesting.
So even single-celled parasites have the same biochemical system that we call
Survival
emotions.
mode.
Well, and emotions are key to survival. And
Right.
that biochemistry that changes, that in turn alters the functions of the brain, not the other way around.
Exactly.
And so we literally can't think what we call thinking when we're afraid or when we're under stress, whether it's physical, mental, or emotional stress, it doesn't matter. You have the same biochemical process called a stress response. And that's
Right.
what we talked about in two different podcasts. And so it really struck me that with our horses and with all animals, we can actually be what's called technically, big word, $2 word of the day, biologically anthropomorphic when it comes to
Mm,
understanding the feelings or being empathetic with the feelings of our dogs, cats, horses, birds, lizards, squirrels, whatever, right? That same experience of fear or joy or calm or excitement, that experience is the same inside everybody.
Right.
And so I really like looked at my horses with a little bit more openness in my eyes and could start to imagine how would I feel if this was done to me.
Right. That's a good point.
And a lot of times I think we start to understand it that if we look at a horse rider relationship in training, I go, it's kind of the equivalent. You could say it's parent child, but
Mm.
horses are like more like permanent teenagers. They're not really toddler level. They're kind of teenage intelligence level. And I look at it more like um, a boss and an employee because
Interesting.
that can be a very beneficial, collaborative relationship, or it can be one of dominance and submission.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
So at our job, we like to feel like we're contributing. We like to feel that we matter.
Hmm.
We like to give our best and get praise and recognition. And I don't think that's any different for horses. I go,
Yeah.
that's
I
an enjoyable experience if you have a
Mhm.
boss that guides you and doesn't kind of put you under the thumb, isn't always
Right.
criticizing you. And if I had to go to a job where, okay, I'm qualified enough, I'm talented enough, but I don't know how to pee off. So I've got to learn how to pee off through work experience. Now, how is my boss or my coworkers, how are they going to guide me to pee off? And I go, it would be ridiculous for them to get a whip out and start beating me into it.
Right.
If I had the means, I would quit. This sucks. Nobody likes to be beaten,
Right.
and nobody likes to be pressured into learning something new.
I think that's the key word. It's the level of pressure and the expectation.
Yeah.
That's huge in the human world because we're driven. We're taught that.
Yeah. And
You know,
I think it has been way too acceptable in the
mm.
horse world. And
And
I go,
it's across the board. It's not just dressage riders.
oh
I
no, I
mean,
was going to say racing,
right?
West,
It's everywhere.
all
Cow
competitive sports.
ponies. I mean,
Yeah.
it's everywhere. It's not, it's just been brought to light more frequently
Yeah,
because
even
we've got access.
well, and even like the steroids given to young horses to make them bulk up and beef up younger,
Hmm.
and the delirious effect it has on their body is stunning, just
Right.
stunning. But it is across the board, and I go, we are going to, the horse world will be no more if these abusive practices continue. I go, there's no need for it. I go, you might have paid a
Right.
lot of money for your uber talented horse that is no longer cooperating, but
Hmm.
I go, some people try to kill them for the insurance money. Other people give
Wow.
them away. Find another job for the horse, find a better fit. If you don't want to put your human agenda on the back burner to work with the horse you have, then rehome the horse you have to the best of your ability and
That's a
get
good
a
way to put
different
it.
horse.
That's a good way to put it, to put the horse first because there's always some language, and I don't know if you've heard this, of horses that come to us of from the owners of, well, how soon can I ride? That's the one I hear all the time. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Well,
Yeah,
30 days, 60 days, what?
it kind of depends on the horse as an individual coupled
Right.
with a very unique human individual. And
Right.
I
They
go,
have to be both on the same page
yeah,
to make it simultaneously be pleasant.
yeah. And to me, I think, the little girl in me wants to see dancing and wants to see, fast speeds where me and the horse are having a great time. like
Uh,
the bareback run down the beach or the,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
jumping through the trails and that kind of thing, or dancing with the horses. And that kind of like harshness, because we've done it to kids, we've done it,
it's
we've done it
everywhere.
to ourselves as humans. So
Hmm.
why wouldn't it happen in the horse world? And it's not a
Right.
judgment or blaming of anybody. And I look back at some of the things I've done and go,
Me
I
too.
I'm ashamed of this or that. I know as I learn more, I do better.
And
And
it's
that's
like I
all
said,
we
it's
can
the lack
ask.
of knowledge. It's the lack of intelligence.
Or a lack of understanding, a lack
Right.
of knowing what to do. And
Hmm.
usually that should call us into going out and learning more. But it's sort of supported by some of the professionals in the horse industry. Just make them do it. Go get some spurs. Go get this bit. Go get
Hmm.
that tie down. Go get this. You're going to have to push them through it. And that's just become, in my estimation, way too acceptable. I go, we don't need to
I
ride horses. We do not, we can get to
That's
work
true.
without our horse.
Nowadays, I guess
Nowadays,
what,
we don't need to. So, what are we doing to make this horse perform rather
right,
than educating the horse into performance?
right. And what I've heard from people is this was supposed to be a top level trainer.
It doesn't matter in our world.
Yeah, I mean, you really got to
Doesn't
look at
matter.
what are they doing to get what they want.
Well, and a lot of times the trainers are under particular pressure because there is this time frame.
Time warp.
Either the owner is pressuring the trainer to get things done faster because the owner's in a hurry, or the owner just has no idea what it's really going to take. And so
Right.
they're setting their expectations unrealistically for the horse, for their skill level, or for the horse's skill level. And I go, if you're going to learn to dance or do martial arts or gymnastics, this is not something you learn overnight. This
Right.
is not something you don't get on the balance beam in the first 90 days with,
Right.
your 3-year-old doesn't turn loose on the balance beam in 90 days, right?
Right.
Without risking severe injury. And that's
Yeah,
sort
and
of
there
what we're,
were when my kids were going through karates because my kids are both black belts, is there were tests, like are you able to do this? If you're not, we go back and train some more. It
but what
was
I always loved about martial arts is whether they group classes with ages, they're teaching the same thing to all beginners, no matter what
yes.
age they show up.
Yes,
And
exactly.
it's very disciplined that way. So, what your kids were learning, if you were taking the same class, maybe in a
Hmm.
different group of adults, you would be learning the exact same
The same
things.
thing. That's the basics. It's not different. There's no difference
Yeah.
in teaching the basics.
But in the horse world, it's expected that by the time your horse is 5 years old, you should be at this level.
Wow.
And I go, it's a complete fabrication
Yeah, it is.
because you have no idea about that horse's uniqueness, the genetics, the growth pattern, how it was cared for, how the training was. Every horse shows up to me starting with whatever the lowest white belt or whatever in
Yeah, right. It
karate
is a
would
white
be.
belt.
Yeah. I go, I just assume every horse shows up and I'm going to test the skills and go,
Right,
it doesn't matter to me if the horse is 20 or 15 or 2, right? Or 3.
right.
And I go, they can either do these skills or they can't. And if they can't do them by the age of 20, I go, well, then we better start working on them.
And we're even going back to say gotten these off the track thoroughbreds. They don't know how to stand still. I mean, that's like a basic
Mhm.
fundamental thing.
It's an important skill when you have a
Yes,
horse in your barn and you do the farrier treatment and
right.
and so what a lot of competitive professionals, competitive minded professionals do is sort of manage a
That's a good
stressed
point.
out horse
Hmm.
because they have the skills to manage these situations, but never further the horse's education so that the horse has that set of skills, no matter the person handling them. And
Right.
so it becomes handler dependent, and the horse,
Yeah.
it's sort of
And
like,
I see that all the time. Once the horse is in the hands of just the owner, I even had one owner with the horse here. She had never led her horse from the barn to turn out.
mm. And so if the horse acted up, she had no tools,
She had no, she,
didn't know what
yeah,
to do.
she had, and
Yeah.
she admitted it. She said, I have never turned my horse out or brought him in. It's always
Which
been
is,
done for me.
to me, is fine. Like I go, that
Right.
is not a judgment of the person.
No.
It has nothing to do with that woman's intelligence. She has just shown up for karate class day one.
Right.
This is how you get your white belt. This is how you, or you start with your white belt and get whatever the next color is. But it's like, to me, the basic handling is something that everybody has to learn at some point.
Right.
And every horse has to develop that set of skills at some point. And
Right.
most of the problem solving behavioral rehab I do is right there in the
It
skills
is.
of catching, leading,
Yes.
tying, farrier visits, vet visits, trailer loading, leading, going
Hmm.
out into the arena and back. And I go, those are grooming issues. Um,
Right. All of that.
all of that. I go, that if the horse can't do those basic handling skills, I go, you don't get your next color belt yet.
Yeah, we don't go up a belt or a stripe. We don't get anything.
Yeah. No, and I just spent 3 months with the horse Rarely Wrong, who's on the Wexford Training Barn playlist. And I think she's in her mid to late teens, off the track thoroughbred, raced for 3 years, has some physical issues like spinal stenosis, but it's like she's just evergreen. She just
Right.
acts, she's like 15 going on
She doesn't
2.
know what she doesn't know.
Yeah. And it's nothing against her,
No, she
but
just doesn't know.
if we don't take the time to let her develop these skills, it leaves her in a very stressful life. And then if we try to add performance to that, or even just ride her safely, those are the black holes we fall into that are suddenly dangerous situations.
Yeah.
It's not a solid foundation to build on or rely on.
Right.
And when the horse doesn't have that, and we assume the horse is 10 years old, they must have that.
They must have had that. Yeah.
I go, not so much. It's
Yeah.
the same way people can make it through school and get their diploma and degree, but not necessarily have learned everything they needed to learn.
I
And
agree.
so they get, that gets filled in real life at the job experience.
Yeah.
And if you have a bad boss, just because you have your college degree doesn't mean you know all the ins and outs of how it works in the real world. And there's
And
that
and we've
learning
talked
curve.
about that at extent. It even goes back to taking a theory and does it
Yeah,
work?
oh yeah.
And we do that all the time. We're going, well, that's a great theory, but does it work? Can we apply it?
And that is kind of the scientific method. There's theory, there's lab research and
Hmm.
testing, but then there's field testing or
Yeah.
clinical trials because you still don't know how it's going to work, even though you've kind of passed it through these other tests.
Right.
And what I see happen between horses and riders are just all of these massive assumptions
Hmm.
and agendas that are complete human constructs.
They
I,
are.
I go, we just made it up in our head and expect the horse to get on board. And some horses are like, yeah, not so much. It's not working for me. And as soon as the horse tells us it's not working for them, we blame the horse.
Yeah. I
And
I
that,
had an experience like that the other day with a horse I've been working with a year and a half, and she was always looking at the trailer situation because it was always an issue for her. And she finally figured out, I said, the reason he won't stand in the trailer, he doesn't stand at the mounting block.
Yeah.
It's not the
Or
trailer.
maybe he doesn't even stand in the wash rack without cross ties.
Well, yeah, all of that. I
Yeah.
said, it's not the trailer. The trailer just amplifies it.
Yes.
It's the mounting block. It's walking him in and out of the stall. It's, will he back up and stand still for the ferry? All of that.
Or
It's not,
could you pick the feet without him being tied?
yeah,
Right?
all
Something
of
as
that.
simple as that. It's like if they don't know the job of halt's a very important speed that
I
most
like
people
halt.
greatly underestimate or
I
undervalue.
love halt.
I go,
I
well,
get
we
a lot
need
done there.
you need halt. Like some of the big issues people have are my horse won't stand still at the mounting block. And actually, I think accident wise, I think the percentage of accident or horse related accidents happen at the mounting block.
That makes total sense to me.
Yeah, because some
Because
horses take off before
we
you
have
get
this
on.
preconceived idea of how it's going to go. Because it's kind of like when I work with people with the Alexander work, if I say, go open the door, their thinking process is already on the other side of the door.
Mm,
They already I, they already have thought through it instead of being present in the moment and looking at, well, what is really happening here? Are we heading for disaster or are we doing well? Nobody's taking any checkpoints
on
to
the way
see if
to the door.
on the way to the door,
Right.
so it's that simple to me is we
Yes.
have a thought and if we act on that thought, are we truly being in the moment? What, it's kind of like that whole deal with me and the stupid trot pole.
I know one trot pole and you
One
saw a
trot
Grand
pole and
Prix
Deb.
stadium in front of your eyes. Yes. Yeah. And I think
So
that's a
that's
good
it. We've
point because
changed the stimulus.
even if we're just doing little exercises at home and tasks, it's like we're sort of seeing ourselves at the competition where we're sort of seeing ourselves perform and we're not actually right in the moment. And then horses who absolutely live in the moment because
Yes.
they have fantastic memories. They do not have the capacity for choice and imagination the same way the human does. And so their choice is pretty black and white. It's like a yes, no type choice, is how they see the world, and can't really imagine something different than what they've already experienced in the past or in the present moment. They can't imagine it being any different. But as soon as they experience something different in the moment, they also let go of the past, which
They're much more adaptable than humans
I
with that.
find their healing is
Yeah.
remarkable
Mm,
compared to humans. It's just
yeah.
less complicated. And what was my point with that? Ding, ding, ding. I had a point. I think it is that the horse has a way of pulling us back into the present moment. That's
Yes.
what it was. So
If we listen, if
when
we
our
listen.
mind gets ahead to the next maneuver, the next jump, the next turn, the next
Mhm.
trail ride, the next show, it's like our horses kind of smack us across the face by not cooperating and going, yeah, you're not there yet.
Well, and do we listen?
Well, that's just it. If we listen, I go 9 times out of 10, my horse is right. I'm not there yet.
Mhm.
And I'm failing to pay attention in the moment, which is where my horse is. That's where my horse's mind
Yeah,
is in the moment. And if my mind goes way into the past or way into the future, I can't really be aware of what's happening in the moment. And
exactly.
I think that's what that video was about. There's a, high level competitor who wants to get to these upper levels showing, and her horse isn't getting the hang of the piaffe. And so our ambition, and I was this way myself, you and I, born from the same litter of Jack
Yeah.
Russells, like that sort of,
We'll
aggressively
get it done.
ambitious. Get it
Get it
done. Yeah.
done.
That, that can can cause us to take that tactic of being way too harsh and abusive and forcing the situation.
Yeah,
And I go, that's what I had to really look at in myself
me too.
is if I'm doing this at my horse's expense, do I really feel good about that blue ribbon? Do I really feel good if my horse is coming up, doesn't like me, number one, doesn't want to
I
see
can't
me,
catch him.
right? Or shuts down and just goes dull, or would take off at any opportunity, give, given the
Bye
chance,
bye,
I'm out of
Felicia.
here. Yeah, bye, Felicia. And it's like when the horse has that mentality against you or has a physical issue, lameness, pain, something like that, or even ulcers, colic
Right.
ulcers, right? Or needing to sedate my horse to get the work done.
I
It's like
hear that.
all of those things are, they're not uncommon, double negative, I know, but they're not uncommon in the horse world.
Not at all.
And I go, but at one time, we didn't think twice about our teachers smacking kids on the butt with a ruler or rapping knuckles or people beating, men especially beating wives or children to keep them in line. I go, that was kind of an acceptable thing at one time in our history. No more, right? And I'm really hoping because it used to be the stewards at some of these competitions didn't check the horses' mouths. Nobody was marked down if the horse was bleeding from the spurs, right? Nobody was marked down
Right.
if the nose bands or the leverage bit or something had some kind of device that created pain so the horse would perform correctly. Or even in the gaited horse world, what they called soaring the feet
Yep.
to
Yep.
make them have better
Hmm.
knee action and lift their feet up more. They would add
Supposedly.
weights and they would burn the feet and
They
add
still do it.
weights to it's supposed to be illegal now, but I'm really supportive more and more that something like this happened, I think is the very best thing for our horse world. As much as I admire and love Charlotte Dujardin, I really respect the fact that she owned up to it and said she was ashamed and bowed out of the Olympics because I go, until we're ready to do that,
Yeah.
we are
Take
going
that jump.
to destroy the horse world. Because the longer we're in horses, the more we kind of get used to it. And we should never get used to it. It should never be a justifiable thing. And people looking at the horse world from the outside, they go, "What are you
Hmm.
doing? What do you mean that top athlete, quote unquote, just broke its leg running a race? How is that possible?" Right? It's like, how are these horses dying going cross country from
Right.
accidents? How are racehorses breaking legs during a race? How are like Barbaro, right? And
Right.
everybody is horrified. And it's not for lack of money spent on that horse.
Right. It's lack of knowledge
It's lack of knowledge. And I go, and
or
if
greed.
Barbaro
Greed,
was, and
you know.
greed, because
Hmm.
if Barbaro was the one in a million exception, I think everybody could see it as a tragedy. But I
Right.
think it happens at least once a year at racetracks. Horses breaking down to the point they have to be put down.
Oh,
And
all the
it's
time.
happening even in eventing, cross
Well,
country.
it's happening
Horses are
if
dying.
you look at it even at the lower level barns around here in Virginia. Horses are breaking down at a much earlier age than they
Yes,
used to.
yes,
I mean, and it's not one single thing. It could be a lot of challenges, but I think what amazes me, I think the biggest challenge for the horse world is to start looking at the new research. Start looking at how the body
yes,
actually functions
yes.
and how to work with that model instead of the models from 50, 100, 200 years ago.
Or even understanding that what triggers an emotion, any emotion from fear to joy, any emo or love. any emotion that we have, our horse can have. Now,
Right.
what stimulates that emotion is very different between horses and people, but the experience of the emotion is the same,
Right.
whether you're a horse or a person. And so when we see body language and energy of stress, I go, that is what stress feels like to us is what that horse is trying to tell us. That's
Right.
what they're feeling. And until we understand feelings and put ourselves, look at through our horse's eyes and think, if somebody did that to me, how would I feel about it?
Right.
How would I respond to somebody who was doing that to me?
Right.
Right? And then you kind of can see it through the horse's eyes and you can start to understand why what you're doing is not working. And it's never
Right.
going to work
It's never
because it
going
would
to.
never work if somebody did it to you. It would never be okay for somebody to make you bloody to perform a test. You would
Right.
never perform the test better.
Or
You
be
would,
drugged.
or be drugged. There's even like
That's the,
doping accidents with horses,
yeah.
right? Just drugged
Right.
into being able to go through the motions. But you
Yeah.
can't be athletic that way,
No,
right?
you
Or
can't be at
even,
your optimum.
and I go, it's just a human nature thing. Like I go, even top athletes dope themselves and take the risk of steroids to try to get the advantage. So I don't know that this will ever end, but I
Right.
think I think when humans impose it on themselves, it's one thing.
Right.
But a horse would never impose that on themselves.
Right. They would never do that.
Right. So I go, that means we are imposing it on another.
Mhm.
And I'm really happy to see like there was a big uproar, I don't, long time ago now, about the training method of using what's called roll cur, where you
Right.
overflex the horse's neck forward and down. And it was really a training strategy.
Oh yeah.
It wasn't part of showing in dressage. It was meant for training, and the theory was it lifted the back, which it didn't. And it just looked so restrictive and so cruel that outside the industry, people were questioning it, which made people
That's
inside
interesting.
the industry question it. And then non-competitive riders just created such an uproar that the governing body of dressage finally made it illegal, even in the warm-up ring, that is an unacceptable practice for
Oh,
dressage.
wow.
And dressage has really taken the lead on like checking nose bands, checking bits, right? If we can see your horse like has a wound from spurs, that now many judges will eliminate them. And I
That's
go,
good.
that's more recent to the sport, but I'm really, really happy to see because I go, otherwise, the outside world looks at horse people and go, your horse doesn't look like it's having a good time. Why do you do
Well,
that?
that's it. The horses aren't enjoying themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. And the horses look tortured and scared and miserable. I
Hmm.
go, what kind of sport is that?
Right.
So maybe ballet? No, just kidding. That's humans doing it to themselves.
Yeah, really.
No, but even, and I actually use dance analogies a lot because you can't make a gymnast, like I equate horse balance and horse movement to the same athletic skill development that we need for dancing, martial arts, or gymnastics. It's a moving coordination that gives you the athletic
Right.
agility. And people train for those for years. It's not an overnight thing that you learn in 60 days or 90 days.
Right.
And in that training, the gracefulness and the athletic agility is the result of all that training, all that skill development that was sort of like wax on, wax off,
The
right?
ABCs. Yep. Exactly.
Little
Exactly.
Karate Kid point of reference. But But that sort of like that image of Mr. Miyagi who was training the Karate Kid in that movie, he had him paint the fence, wax the car, that repetitive motion. And the kid thought he was doing nothing, and it suddenly translates into martial arts moves. And I go,
Right.
that to me is kind of what education feels like. There's a lot of repetition until you develop the coordination, the muscle memory, and the strength to
Yeah.
have all that self-control over the body. And that's what I would love to see in our horses.
I think that's a good point you brought up. The horse, we've mentioned this before. They're not talking about self-carriage or self-control.
It's an
It has,
old-fashioned term.
it is,
Hmm.
and the horses have become totally manipulated
Yeah.
into something that maybe they're not.
Yeah, if you take 2 ounces of pressure off those reins, or you go from a bit and bradoon or leverage bit to a snaffle, all of a sudden the horse can't do the maneuvers. I
Right.
go, then you have no self-carriage.
You have no self-carriage,
I go,
no self-control.
if you need the leverage to get the maneuver done, you have no self-carriage.
I totally agree.
Yeah,
Yep.
if you need the spurs, you have no self-carriage.
Right.
And I actually had this conversation with a client in a remote lesson, because I am a big believer in carrying a riding whip or carrying
Hmm.
a whip. And I go, never to abuse the horse. I go, the
Right.
reason I use a riding whip rather than spurs is because when you tap a horse with the whip, my arm isn't long enough to reach the hindquarters unless I'm standing by the hindquarters
By
or
there,
sitting on
back
them,
there.
right? But if I'm up by the shoulder, neck, head, or straddling the upper part of the back in a saddle, my arm isn't long enough to physically touch the hind legs or the hindquarters. So a whip is like an arm extender so that I can gently tap the horse like I would tap somebody on the shoulder to get their attention. And what that does, that light little tap, it's just like if somebody comes up and taps us on the shoulder from behind us, our attention goes there,
Right.
right?
And
So,
it doesn't have to be a smack on the back of the head.
oh no, because you might turn around and break a bottle over their head, right? It's like,
And that's what people sometimes do. They lose their temper.
and they give a
And
smack.
it-
Yeah.
that's so important to hear you say it is a very light, hey, do you hear me kind of thing.
Not only that, but it's like when somebody touches your shoulder, your body awareness goes to your shoulder. If
Hmm.
somebody touches your leg, your body awareness goes to your leg. If somebody touches your foot, your body awareness goes to your foot. So the way the whip actually works when we're riding horses is when we gently tap the hindquarters, then the horse's attention goes to the hindquarters.
Right.
And what I'm essentially saying in that little tap is, can you move forward from here? Can you push forward from here? Right? Rather than, squeezing them like a tube of toothpaste in the middle, I want them to, pick me up as a rider with the
Right.
engagement of the hind legs and sort of
Right.
carry forward in self-carriage. So the whip is a very good tool. I use it like a magic wand, kind of pointing and touching or just moving energy. But I go, it can also be a tool of abuse.
It can.
And
Any
that,
tool, any
yes,
tool,
it's really the person
anything.
handling it that makes the
Oh,
difference.
huge.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
So I just thought it was such an interesting conversation that this whole thing with the video and the horse being beaten into the piaffe, that once again in our industry, when things like that come to the surface, I think it's important to have this hard conversation
Mhm.
and not
And
in a
are you going
judge.
to make changes when you see it? Are you going to actually look at your own program and say, do
Yeah.
I need to change something?
And that's exactly where I was going because I was going to
Yeah.
start that by saying you cannot judge the person.
No, you,
It is a
yeah.
it's a human instinct, it's a human weakness. We're
Mhm.
all capable of it. It can happen to anyone, even very good people who mostly have their heart in the right place. But we only have the choice in ourselves never to go there or to walk away
Walk
instead
away.
of to,
Remembering you have a choice
yeah, that
to
we
walk
have a
away,
choice to take a break, calm down, think it through,
reevaluate. Yep.
put the horse away, blow the
Yep.
steam out, and take a fresh start after we've regrouped. I think
Right.
the other thing we can do, because like this lady was saying, I really liked this trainer. I saw this bad situation in the arena, but this horse was being extreme. They wanted to get the horse back into showing, and this was the horse's quote unquote last chance that they
Wow.
were, and I go, whose last chance? What last
Who's
chance?
making that
Who's
crap up?
making that call? I go, you can
Wow.
give the horse away. You could retire the horse. I said, if it's not matching the human agenda, and I think that's why the topic today was like, whose agenda are we talking about when it comes to
Exactly.
getting harsh?
Hmm.
Whose time frame? Whose goals, right? 9 times out of 10, it's the humans that justify the harsh tactics. And even
Right.
very kind, good trainers can feel that pressure of
Right.
trying to get the horse turned around, hoping that the horse doesn't get put down or go to a home that is even worse than the one they're at. And I go, I get it, but we as individuals have to make the choice whether we do it ourselves or not. But we also have to make a choice that when we see it, how do we respond to someone else doing it in front of us? And without
Right.
judgment, I mean, sometimes removing myself from the situation is all I can do.
I agree.
Other times I might say something, even something like, is that really necessary?
Hmm.
Just questioning it can kind of, it might piss somebody off pretty bad. But even if we question it, is that really the best way to get this
Right.
done? Is it
Right.
really necessary to wail on the horse that much?
Right.
And even just sort of questioning it with people that we otherwise respect, care about, trust, um, to question it in the moment. And I've watched
Hmm.
you do it. Like I've watched you do it from the sidelines without saying a word. I've watched you get this sort of scowly look on your face and your eyebrows come in together and you don't make eye contact with anybody and you start sort of marching around like you got something to do. Yeah. And I go,
We
you don't
know each
have to
other
say a
pretty well, don't
word.
we?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
I
too
go, I know
funny.
that look. Yeah. And sometimes it's not our business and we don't like I'm very careful that I don't go in a judgmental, self-righteous, I'm better than you kind of
Right.
attitude. That's really blaming the person or judging them. I go, I think it's important to reach out to people and go, first of all, maybe if I were going to interrupt a situation, I would go, hey, how's that working? Or is that really necessary? And just create that pause where we could maybe examine what we're doing.
Right.
And then the person is typically training in an abusive way, not intending to be an abusive person because it's so common.
It's accepted.
It's just so deeply entrenched,
It's just hundreds of years
right?
been there.
Like spanking children, beating children, and I go, whatever side of the fence you fall on regarding spanking, it's now up for debate, where it
Right.
used to be an undebatable norm,
Correct.
right? And so I go, that's what I'm trying to say is let's make it a debatable issue, whether or
Hmm.
not that is ever necessary,
Right.
and at least bring that pause into the conversation and go, if we don't have a horse as a partner, and if we're not doing this for our horse's health and well-being, as well as our performance goals, then what are we doing? We
Right.
basically then have a slave-master relationship.
And some people, if the
Some
horse
people, I
doesn't,
think, don't question it. I think most
right?
people
I think
who
that's a
get
good
into
point.
horses love horses,
Right.
and they all say they love horses. Even people who use very harsh tactics say they're in it for the horse. And I go, well, are you really?
Or yeah, whose agenda again?
Like, whose
Sorry.
agenda is taking precedence in those
Right.
moments where the pressure is on and you're feeling the heat? Can you still be fair to your horse who doesn't have the same choice that we have?
No. Or
They don't
agenda.
have the choice.
Right.
Yeah. And I go, so we can make it a bad boss situation, a slave master relationship, a, you know, sort of des king to the masses situation, but it's like we also have the choice to build a partnership.
Right.
And horses ideally should thrive because they have a human in their life,
Hmm.
live longer, happier, more fulfilling lives than if we just turned them loose in Nevada.
My horses wouldn't fare well.
No, mine wouldn't fare well. So, so I feel a little bit soapboxy today, but I kind of felt like it was an important conversation to talk about because it's
Right.
uncomfortable. It's
Yeah.
uncomfortable to see it. And in my world, I don't see it anymore. So when I do see
I
it, it's
don't
kind
either.
of
So when
almost
it came up on
stunningly.
Facebook, I was like, wow, it's really being broadcasted.
Yeah. And it, I'm now shocked by it, where in my past and history, I used to see it a lot. And
It
it was
was,
something I
yeah,
was told is acceptable. And then having found other methods, more education, different ways, it never occurred to me like it just sort of didn't occur to me that I don't see things like that anymore
yeah. In my world,
in my world. Yeah.
no, it's not in my world.
Yeah.
So,
But you don't have to walk far to find it.
no, I see it next door, my neighbors.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways, I hope I haven't bummed you guys out, or maybe we've given you a lot to think about in this podcast.
Right.
But I think even with our backyard horses and the ones we love, when we're taking the choice away by creating a level of stress or discomfort that sort of forces our horse to acquiesce and be
Hmm.
obedient to our demands without really considering why they're resisting, why they're not cooperating. Um, if we don't start thinking that way about our own horses, then we could be that owner that's putting pressure on a trainer that's perpetuating this problem.
Yeah, I agree.
So, yeah, kind of a bummer of a topic, but I think to keep generating interest in horses, because face it, they're riddled with problems, they're expensive, they give us lots of grief, 5 minutes of happiness once a month, and we do it all the time, right? And I think to gain more interest in horses, which means more homes for more horses, which means more care for more horses. Like,
Right.
I'm really supportive of trying to help the horse world grow as a horse world, but these kind of strategies and tactics being acceptable drive people away from horse ownership, away
Hmm.
from becoming interested in riding or learning about horses. And I go, that hurts all of us.
Right.
And it hurts horses because there's fewer homes for horses because
Yes.
of it. So that's the last thought I want to leave everybody with. But obviously,
Heavy. Heavy.
it I get a bit passionate about it too
I
because
get
it's
it. I've
yeah,
been avoiding it too,
it's a
but I'm
big
glad
deal.
I'm glad we talked about it.
Me too.
All
Because
righty.
it should hurt our heart to see that. it should hurt our heart. Whether it
Exactly.
was a person, a child, a dog, a horse, whatever, it just, if that
Right.
were us, how would we feel? What would we do? How would we react in that situation?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. And then we can gain a little bit of understanding, which leads to a little bit more patience.
Yes.
Final words, Deb?
That's a lot. I'm good.
That's a lot.
It's a lot
All
to
right.
swallow.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. Look
Take
forward to seeing
care.
you on the next episode.
Bye.
Bye.